Why do some Muslim communities uphold shame culture and honor killings? Does it have its root in Islam or pre-Islamic culture? Um, right. So yes, first of all, it's we need to condemn any kind of honor attacks, honor killings, honor violence, shame culture. This is nothing to do with Islam. But like many things, people can shroud it in Islamic rhetoric. So it's not difficult. Look, a person can take the Quran and use it to justify any kind of means. So let's say you had all kinds of crazy sects in the past that did things like the Khawarij, who were like the forerunners to ISIS. They would butcher people and really ruthless. They would use certain verses of the Quran to try to twist it towards their meaning. So it's like they attacked Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anh, and Muawiyah, and they said that all of you have become kafir, and they used verses of the Quran to justify in al hukmu illa lillah, that you two are trying to have a truce where really only God is the true judge. And so people can use the Quran or use Islam. It's a bit like saying how Bush used the um, the American Constitution to justify his kind of his enemy combatant state and try to uh, justified Gitmo, Guantanamo Bay, on the back of the American Constitution. So a person can use anything and twist it to say, well, oh, I'm using it's like how Putin was now before invading, he used a alleged democratic process to say, well, now the upper house in Russia has authorized me following our democratic process to do this. So people may say this has nothing to do with Islam. Nothing. Islam abhors and condemns this shame culture, this kind of shaming, name and shame, this kind of honor attacks, all of this. It is just insecure people, and it very like so. So, for example, people will hold like if you take a look at like let's say romance is demonized in some parts of the Muslim world, like being in love with someone is demonized, like if you're not married yet. So even if let's say the person now came to propose but it became known that, oh, he likes her, it's like, no, this is now a dishonor. Like, I mean, what goddamn millennium are you guys living in? Like that was never the case. Like even in Jahiliyyah Arabia and in Islamic Arabia in the time of the Prophet, these things, marriage was such a natural thing. It was never like this. It was never like that. Like marriage and love and divorces, and they would have divorces and marriages straight away, and they weren't tarnished. There was none of a lot of this. There seems to be a heightened attitude towards sexuality, especially in the Desi world, which is not really doesn't come to us from Islam, because the Islamic literature seems to be much more emboldened and kind of brazen in its attitude towards sex. So, in fact, we don't even dare translate how it's said because it's too kind of appears vulgar. But in Arabic, it just appears normal. So they treated like sex was a very natural state to them. So now in pre-Islamic Arabia, they wouldn't have sure they would have had their own social kind of thing. So maybe they looked down on, for example, slaves. So if a woman had an affair with a slave, then that may have been seen. Or maybe they saw it as a certain because the tribe was an inferior tribe. They maybe saw that, but it wasn't the fact that she was, for example, having this romantic affair with someone that was itself seen as like, oh my God, that's so disgusting, or that. I mean, I'm not saying maybe they didn't celebrate it, but they weren't. It wasn't a big deal for them. These things weren't how they saw it. Sure, maybe if they had other rules, and I don't believe that they had stoning. This was not from pre-Islamic Arabia. This was from the Jewish things. So the Arabs wouldn't have had that. They would have had the lashing and stuff. So they would have lashed people, but they wouldn't have stoned them. This was not an Arab custom mainly for things like that. I'm not saying, obviously people knew how to pick up stones and throw them at people. They understood that, but it wasn't like you go and stone somebody for having a sexual encounter with. So that was not generally, as far as I'm aware, known as an Arab custom. That was something that was in the Torah and from the Jewish customs. And even the Jews didn't really do it in Arabia. So maybe the odd Jewish thing, because even in the Hadith, the Jewish people are practicing something else. They're kind of blackening the faces and putting them on donkeys when they catch them doing adultery and making them go around. So they're not actually doing things like the stoning. And in fact, that's where they come to the Prophet saying, well, look, in the famous Hadith, that we only judge by our book. And the Prophet saying, well, that's double standards then, because your book says something else. So because they're saying we're going to blacken the face and put them on a donkey and I think shave his head or whatever, and then they make this statement about we only go by our scripture, and then the Prophet says, well, but that's not in your scripture. This doing the donkey thing and doing isn't your scripture about stoning. And so this is the kind of the double standard and the hypocrisy that the Prophet is pointing out to them, that but you guys, sure, but why are you claiming that you only stick to scripture then? So this is but this whole culture is a very backwards, nothing to do with Islam. And you'll see different cultures, Muslim cultures, are very open to so many things. Like, it's a good example contrasting something like Afghanistan, Pakistan, those areas, with something like Mauritania. Because like Mauritania is going to be, both ends are hyper religious, let's say, or I don't know if hyper religious is the right word, but both ends have religion is the strong current that permeates their entire society. But yet the manifestations are so different. Like if you take Mauritania, take this relationships as an example. Women will, throughout their lifetimes, have multiple marriages, and it's like a social status symbol. So if a woman, in fact, you can go onto YouTube and watch a drama on it. I mean, you can watch a documentary on it. So women will kind of, in their way, they'll kind of shame, or not shame, but they'll mock a woman who's only ever had one marriage in her life. Like they'll be like, ha ha ha, well, she's only ever had one man. And there'll be women on average will go through at least 10 marriages. There's somebody that will this one lady speaking about how she's been through 40 marriages. She's like really boastful that I had 40 marriages. And there's things where they will be like the husband and wife. There was an incident where the husband and wife were like, oh look, they're not really getting on. So she says, look, you know what, I think, and he says, I think we should just divorce or whatever. And she's like, yeah, that's great. And she says, do you think your friend, is he up for marriage? And then he sets her up, says, yeah, of course he is. So she then marries the friend. And this is now, you see, if I describe these practices to you, you're gonna, like a stereotypical kind of profiling thing is, if I tell that to, let's say, people in Pakistan without describing who the culture is, they're going to picture something, oh, these are these lewd Europeans kuffar, got no value for God, got no value. How can a woman want to be with 20 men throughout her life? How can a woman? And then you tell them, no, this is Mauritania where children memorize the Quran and everybody's a hafid of the Quran and they do hijab and they've got mashayikh and they're deeply rooted in Maliki fiqh and all they know is fiqh and they memorize poems and they some of the best kind of memories that we've got in the entire Arabic world. And they won't be able to, like, there'll be like a system malfunction. Like they won't be able to understand that. How does that happen? Because to them, they think, like in, let's say, the eastern part, that their sexual sensitivity must be, which is so, these kind of insecurities that they have, they don't think they're insecurities. They think they're heightened sexual sensitivities and taboos must be rooted in their Islamic identity. This is what they assume. So if you, thereby the corollary that follows, the logical conclusion is that if you are Islamic, you too must have these values embedded. But if they were to find a society that was arguably more Islamic than them, because unlike them, they actually all almost memorize the Quran and they all understand Arabic and they memorize Maliki fiqh and they teach some of the greatest kind of memories on earth. They study hadith. I mean, this is the common people. You'll hear stories of women saying, well, you know, I won't even marry a guy who hasn't, like, if the guy hasn't even memorized these poems on grammar and so on, then what a failure. It's like how people would say, does he not have a degree? They would say, does he not know Alfiyat ibn Malik? He doesn't even know that. So if you tell them that these women have, or this society is even more Islamic, but yet their attitudes towards sex and relationships are entirely different, they won't be able to fathom that. Because what's the alternative? Because where are you getting your sensitivities and this from? Because you're getting them not then from Islam. You're getting them from some insecurities that you have that are kind of cultural insecurities, and that nobody wants to admit to. You see, people feel bad saying this is an insecurity. They justify it by saying, no, this is a religious good act. That this is, you know, as people say, the youth, you know, the youth, the people who don't, they don't be jealous over their women, and the youth. Now, you hear this often amongst our Salafi brethren using this term, that the youth. Now, so the Mauritanian mashayikh, all these people, they're probably considering them the youth then. But that said, speaking of the Salafi, the divorces happen just the same amongst them. They marry these women, divorce them, pass them around, and utterly destroy the woman by the end of the process. So there is a lot of unpacking and unwrapping to do. And one thing we learn is that culture is not coming from religion. If anything, the religion will take the flavor of the culture that you have. And I love what Sheikh Umar Farooq Abdullah had said, that he gave this example. I heard it years ago in his lecture series. I think it was on the four madhabs, where he said that Islam is like a stream, like a river, and the water just takes the color of the riverbed. So that's what Islam does. It just kind of flows over, taking the kind of reflecting the properties of its environment that it's passing through. I thought that was epic.